Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be my thoughts on the big FAQ number 1 2018 for Warhammer 40,000. This is one of two major FAQs published every year by Games Workshop to effectively work as a patch for the rules of Warhammer 40k. This is obviously a really good concept. The fact that the rules are constantly being updated and, well, balanced is always a good thing. I mean, you do have to stay on top of these things if you're going to be playing in anything other than a super casual format, but it is a really good thing nonetheless. Today, there have been, well, not today, but this time last week, there was a series of changes, both confirming the last set of beta rules and introducing some new ones, and I want to discuss both of those things today. Small preface before we get started, because this probably will be mentioned. I am not the most tournament-minded of people. I don't go to tournaments. I don't particularly care for tournament list building. That's not my scene, that's not my style. What I care more about as a rule of thumb is general game balance and fun and narrative. They've always been the sort of things I want this game to be fun. I want it to be competitive for people who want to play that way, but it doesn't have to be super competitive to satisfy me. The narrative is more important, and the armies all having a chance to do something that is at least somewhat good is more important. That's what I've always considered to be the main thing to my mind. If you think that that means that I don't know what I'm talking about, then by all means, but that is just a little bit of context I wanted to put in. I've also got a little article that's worked on Warhammer Community in the middle of the week, which was the thoughts of some playtesters who are also partly tournament organisers and such, who gave their thoughts on the FAQ, so in case you don't agree with everything I'm saying, at least you can listen to them, because they do know what they're talking about. So, without any further ado and preface, let's dive in. So, first off, we have the finalised rules that were introduced back at Christmas time. The tentative beta rules for Psychic Focus and Character Targeting. Psychic Focus has been patched again, so the final version is not the same as the beta version. What they've done is that they've kept the every power except Smite can only be cast once, and they have kept the Smite gets harder and harder and harder to cast as you go on and cast it multiple times or attempt to cast it, but this does not apply for Grey Knights and Thousand Sons, or units with Brotherhood of Psyker and Brotherhood of Sorcerers. This is, as they say here, in response to it over-affecting Grey Knights and Thousand Sons, and I can see why. If you have several units of the same type who know the same powers, then you can only cast those special powers once, therefore you have to cast Smite with everybody else. The fact that Smite gets harder and harder to the point of being impossible means that half your units, or at least a sum of your units, might not get to do anything in the Psychic phase simply because the Smite limit is in play and the power limit is in play. Deconstricting that for them is a good move and hopefully gives them more options, so I approve. But the fact they haven't completely unlimited it is also very important. They've had a nice little middle ground, which I think is something we're going to see many times. We're going to see some rules kept and some rules brought down to a sort of middle ground of to how effective they are. Whoops, I shot in my scrolling there. The second one is about targeting characters, and this one has not been changed from the beta version. So that means that you still cannot target characters with less than 10 wounds if they are the not the closest visible model, but other enemy characters with 10 or less wounds do not count in terms of screening. So a chaplain cannot shield Guilliman, but a tactical squad still can. So that hasn't been changed. You've been playing with that now for about 4 months, so that's good. And I think that's a good middle ground because the little mini character bubbles were extremely annoying to deal with, but characters being sniped out because they can't join units anymore is also maybe very annoying, particularly in the high-power shooting edition that is Warhammer 40,000. Age of Sigmar, it's annoying. 40k, it would be downright unusable. And then we come to this round of beta rules. These concern tactical reserves, aka, well, reserves, and battle brothers, aka detachment keywords, but we'll get to that one in a moment. Probably the more controversial one has been about tactical reserves. And I want to draw from the one of the organisers from London GT in explaining this one. The Tactical Reserves rule, which requires any unit that arrives on the battlefield during the first turn to be deployed in the controlling player's deployment zone, is fantastic. I'll explain the full rule in a moment. This is a massive change for the better, as before, a player could design an army whereby all of their firepower could deploy in turn 1 and wipe your opponent's army off the table. This was not fun to play against. What's more, it meant that opponents had to spend ages deploying, desperately trying to limit the deployment of reserve units. This slowed the game down a lot. Now you don't really need to worry about either of those things in the first turn, because your opponent has to place reserve units in their deployment zone. I have always had an issue with, well, in 8th edition, I've always had an issue with the Alpha Strike. That's the terminology we use for dropping in a very large amount of your army very early in the game and whacking your opponent into oblivion immediately. It's basically a one-turn Hail Mary that can win the game on its own. And in the last iteration before this patch, basically did win games on its own quite a lot. I don't know whether Alpha Strike armies were the most powerful things going, but they were an exceptionally cheap way to win games quickly. And whilst I don't have a problem with the idea of using reserves and doing a lot of damage with powerful reserves, I used to do that a lot in 7th edition because I ran a far side bomb. I don't like the idea of it being an instant win condition. I don't. I like the idea of a lot of reserves coming in and doing heavy damage that can swing a game and help get you on the road to a win. But I don't want it to be a case of, oh, I did an Alpha Strike and you didn't deploy well, lol, JK, not JK, GG, you lose, scrub. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of, if you don't deploy like a god, it does not matter if your army is better, your generalship is better, your dice are better, you just effectively got wrecked. Some people think that's good and would just say, well, get good. I disagree. And that's just my opinion. I disagree with that as a concept, so I'm glad that they're doing this. What they're actually doing is a triple nerf, and I think maybe, just maybe, they might have gone too far. So, the first one is the one we discussed from the London DT organizer. Any unit that arrives on the battlefield during the first turn must be deployed wholly within the controlling player's deployment zone, even if it would normally be allowed to set up anywhere. This does not apply to Cult Ambush or any scouting abilities such as Forward Operatives or Strike from the Shadows. This, in effect, means you cannot Alpha Strike on turn 1. You can do it on turn 2 if you hold everything back and then drop in, but by that time your opponent's had a turn to spread out, redeploy, score some objective points, and all of that good stuff. So the OTK Alpha Strike has been severely neutered just by this introduction. Would this be enough on its own? I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'd leave that to someone who is more of an expert. I like the idea, though, of just keeping a Riptide Core, for example, in reserve and then dropping it in afterwards once your opponent's had a turn, so it can come in untouched or where it can't be deployed against, and then laying down the heavy fire. I like that as a concept. Is it too much? Again, I leave that up to the playtesting to decide. However, they wouldn't even stop there. Instead of being set up on the battlefield during deployment, however, when setting up your army during deployment for a matched play game, at least half the total number of units in your army must be set up on the battlefield, and the combined power of all the units you set up, including those embarked in transport, must be at least half of your total power. Even if you would allow if you had your entire army allowed to be set up elsewhere, you can't. I know why this is here. This is to stop what I term the beta strike, where you basically do an Alpha Strike on turn 2. i.e. you still hold huge amounts of your army back, you weather the storm for a turn, and then you drop in anyway and you still just win the game. I know why they've done this, however I worry that it's excessive because there are some armies who, for example, would like to deploy something really big and tanky and keep everything else back because they want that to lay down the law, lay down the heavy fire, and then they can just drop in their reserves where they want to pick off the stragglers. That doesn't work because you have to deploy half your units. Or you might have a really powerful trio of units, for example. Let's say a powerful HQ, a powerful heavy, and a really powerful combat unit that you want to drop in. But if they come to more than half your power, even if you deploy enough units on the board, you cannot do that. So there are some armies that are going to be punished heavily by this. Grey Knights, Tau, if they run a lot of battle suits, will be punished by this. And so I worry that this nerf is excessive. I agree with the deployment zone thing. I think that's a really good change. I like that a lot. It might not be the most thematic change, but for the sake of balance, I like the change. However, the double nerf to deployment is maybe excessive. I think they could do with one of those rules being retired, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the final version, when that's published in maybe September, or whenever they do decide to finalize these rules, either in the next big FAQ or some other time, I get a feeling this rule will be dialed back or otherwise tweaked. But of course, that's up to the playtesters and that's up to you guys in the community to go and test these rules and see if they are too crippling to certain armies or not helping. That we shall have to see. The second change is what we call the soup nerf. So soup, for those who again don't know their terminology, is the word we use for armies that are built out of an extremely generic keyword and use loads of different armies in one detachment. So, for example, you could have a detachment that, and I'm going to be a bit arbitrary here, included Gilliman, a Custodian Shield Captain, 2 squads of Guardsmen, a squad of Sisters of Battle, Seraphim, a Baal Predator, and what else do I want to include? A Vindicator Assassin, Deathwatch Kill Team, Legion of the Down Squad, Inquisitor, Sister Silence Squad. You get the picture. You could basically include anything that had the Imperium keyword, which, by the way, is a lot. There is a second guilty party, particularly in the tournament scene, which was the Ynnari, who could do some really, really nasty things with that. And so they've introduced the Battle Brothers change. It's only for match play, so if you want to do this in narrative and open play, you can, but here is what's going on. So, all the units in each detachment must have a faction keyword in common. That has not changed. In addition, this keyword cannot be Chaos, Imperium, Eldari, Ynnari, or Tyranids. Unless it's a fortification. This is a necessary nerf. How much it will change remains to be seen, because how much it affects, particularly Ynnari and Imperial, is going to be interesting. Because you also have to consider the fact that in tournaments, which is what this is designed to affect the most, you're limited on the amount of detachments you can actually bring in a game. So you can only do so much to try and get around this and just bring lots of little detachments. So it is a necessary change to stop soup armies, and it will help create some fluffy armies. Some fluffy armies will take a hit, some will gain. So the keywords now that you'll probably be building around will be Adeptus Astartes, for example, Nurgle as a Chaos God instead of Chaos. You'll build around Craft World, you might build around Asayani, you might build around Hive Fleet, you might build around Demon. That's still an option, you can have an old Demon army including Demon engines, but you are slightly capped. They have also included some necessary errata, so Legion of the Damned, Sisters of Silence, Assassins, and such are now not going to cost you command points to bring them in the separate detachment because they have no HQs. As long as you have an Imperial Warlord. So you're not going to be punished for including Legion of the Damned, Sisters of Silence, or Assassins, but you aren't going to be able to slot them into your old detachments quite so easily. That's the main change. They've also done some clarification work with Ynnari. I don't own Index Xenos 1, so I'm just going to leave this on the screen for 30 seconds while I talk over it, so as you can understand what's being changed as Ynnari players. Basically, by the looks of it, you just slot the big 3 of the Ynnari into any detachment that is legal, i.e. doesn't include Homunculi, Avatars, Mandrakes, Drazhar. So you can't include those, but you can just slot the Ynnari units into that, give the Eldari units Ynnari, but they lose the faction abilities that they have in favour of Strength from Death, so they can't use Battle Focus, Power from Pain. They will still get their Warlord traits and relics and such from their Codex, but they will not gain the detachment abilities such as Obsessions and Mask Forms, which is going to be the name of the Harlequin one when they get their Codex. So that's probably necessary, just a good bit of clarification, so hopefully that helps to tone things down and also introduce a bit more variety into armies, though I'll discuss that a bit more with a later point. They've then introduced some little minor erratas. So they have buffed battalion and brigade detachments to give you more command points. And I want to draw attention to something that was said from the Nova team about this. Many people will initially read Brigade Detachment getting 12 command points and Battalion getting 5 instead of 9 and 3 respectively, and think, well, that's just silly, now Astra Militarum have even more. This was an initial reaction that we had, but on deeper analysis it's a bit irrelevant. The issue with command points was the narrow range of armies that could get enough to do what they really needed, whilst others already had more than they could realistically use. We could have chosen to in some way limit their access, but all we do is make armies struggle to generate CP. Instead, by increasing the number of points generated, this encourages fielding armies that look like armies with a healthy dose of officers and troops, and enables most factions and builds to generate more than enough CP by fielding at least a battalion. So, there will be some armies that will just have more command points to use, but another question you have to throw on top of that is, do they really have enough reason to need more than the command points that they already have? Some armies do, some armies don't, and this means that more armies will have enough command points to do what they want to do, rather than just being really constricted. It's like, I have to be really picky about which command points I use without taking additional detachments. Some armies will benefit from this more than others, but I like the change, and I also generally use the bigger detachments more often, so I'm on board. The Tide of Traitor stratagem has been nerfed to be once per battle, so good, no infinite reinforcement, that's kind of nice. And Word of the Phoenix, one of the Ynnari powers, has been nerfed to have a warp charge of 8. Small change, I expect, probably not too crazy, but it is probably a good thing. I don't know, you'd have to know for yourself if you play with or against Ynnari a lot. The final major change on the errata front is the inclusion of the nerf to ignoring wounds. So there is a way, through combinations of relics, warlord traits, and other abilities, to stack what we call save after saves. So, for example, a Death Guard with Disgusting Resilience, some relic, and a warlord trait could get their armor save, then 5+ Disgusting Resilience save, then a 6+ warlord save, then another save after that. And it made some guys functionally immortal. That is a relatively nice nerf to stop some guys being over immortal, but at the same time it will also speed the game up because you don't have so many save after saves to take. So, speeds the game up, stops characters being too immortal. I'm on board with both of those things. Is it too much? I don't know. We'll have to see. That's what playtesting is for. Finally, for tournaments, they have made one major change. Or perhaps two. So they have limited the number of detachments and the number of data sheets per detachment that you can include. So now in 1,000 point games, you're only allowed 2 detachments per army and only up to 2 of each data sheet per army, unless they are troops and transports. In 2,000 point games, it's 3 detachments per army and 3 data sheets per army. Is that per detachment or per army? It seems to be per army rather than per detachment. So yeah, that's going to be quite painful. And then 4 and 4 for 3,000 point games. So what this is going to do is effectively stop, to some extent, spamming or detachment scumming. Basically, because of the Battle Brothers nerf, people might think, well, now I need to take a bunch of mini detachments in order to get my Imperial soup list back. Nope, you can't do that. That has not been allowed. Which is an interesting workaround, and I think it's probably for the best. And the limits on data sheets means that you stop situations that we had at Adepticon, where an army of like 5 to 7 Flyrants just came in and ruined people's day. I believe they'd actually won the thing. And we're also aware that Dark Reaper spam Ynnari is rather powerful. So this is going to be a nice cap on both of those things, and this is the diversity point. Because of the cap to units that you can use and the amount of units that are good and usable, because you can't spam so much, people will be forced to try out other units in their armies, particularly if they want to get the new command point bonuses off the brigades and the battalions. Therefore, for a time at least, I suspect we'll see a quite diverse meta, where more armies are tried, or more flavours of certain armies are tried, in order to take advantage of the new setup that we have. And I like that. And I hope that as the FAQs keep coming and the tournaments keep happening, the meta basically keeps evolving. I don't want to see a 7th edition type scenario where we had one army rule the roost for basically the entire edition, being challenged by a few other things, but always just being effectively tier 0 or 0.5. I want to see more armies being able to compete, which is what these balance changes hopefully will help with, And I want to see more flavour within those armies and more diversity within them so that different builds can be taken into tournaments and also compete. So I hope that that does happen. Was there anything else? Yes, there was. There was a points change. I can't quite get these all on the screen for you. I apologise. But highlights, so both sets of commissars have had a point change for Astra Militarum. Guilliman has had a 15-point increase. The Flyrant has had a point increase. And there have been several changes to craft worlds. All of their psychics have gone up in cost, and Dark Reapers have gained a 7-point increase as well. This means that Dark Reapers are less spammable, even though there is a limit on the amount you can spam nowadays. And some people have been criticising the fact that Warlocks have been nerfed because of the fact that the powers are the problem and Warlocks actually kind of suck. But I don't want to judge that. I've not actually faced craft worlds in this edition. All I can say is it's kind of telling that 5 units have been nerfed for craft worlds, as opposed to maybe 2 or 1 for some armies, and some armies haven't been changed at all. I don't know how much that should say, but I think that's something that is worth drawing attention to. There's the last couple of changes for you. And that is your lot. So that is the big FAQ 2018, the first. And overall, I think this is a well-intentioned set of changes. It's clear that listening to our podcast co-host Alexis, she talks about some of the things that go on in tournaments, and she's always made points about alpha striking and Dark Reaper spam and soup armies, and those are things that have been forwarded to Games Workshop, and they've tried to respond to them. I am curious to see whether these changes will last, as in, will they survive into the next FAQ in their current form, or will they be tweaked again for those final beta rules? So I think that the Tactical Reserves one could definitely see a dialing back, though I don't think it'll be fully dialed back. I think it'll just be modified again, but I don't know. I think Battle Brothers will be kept as is, but we shall have to see. But of course, that is just my opinion, and as I said in the preface, I'm not the most competitively-minded player. What do you think? Try and think about it both in terms of your armies personally, so what are your armies going to gain and lose from this, but try and think on a broader scale as well. It can be easy to say, oh, my army's been nerfed, no, this sucks. Yeah, but is it going to help the health of the game overall? Keep that in mind. And of course, if you have critique when you've done your playtesting of this, do let Games Workshop know. I think they have a FAQ email address or something that you can go and contact them at, or wherever they ask you to do it. Get in touch with them, tell them this is what we have experienced in our games, here's what we would recommend for changes going forward, and the TOs will do that. Tell your TOs, tell your store managers, and tell Games Workshop directly. And then hopefully the next set of rules, which will be either in a mid-term patch or in the next big FAQ in September or October if it runs late again, will hopefully be much more up to speed, and we'll get another set of beta rules that will hopefully be helpful. And of course, I will keep you up to date with those when they are published. But as I said, this is a well-intentioned set of FAQs. I like what they're doing with every change. I approve of every change. I don't know if they'll be kept. I think some of them might be dialed back or modified again, but we shall have to see. Thank you all for watching. This has been Tactica Imperialis, and this has been my thoughts on the big FAQ 2018 Part 1. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.